March 19, 1944. Southern Bougainville, Solomon Islands. The jungle canopy overhead filters the equatorial sun into fractured green light. Shadows layering over shadows. Every vine a potential snare, and every rustle a possible death. A lone U.S. Marine scout moves through waist-high undergrowth, rifle slung across his back. Carrying instead a strange, angular weapon no one in his company trusts. His name is Robert Leckie, though the men call him Mailbox behind his back, not out of affection but derision, because the rifle he carries came from a catalog, ordered through the mail, a civilian hunting weapon brought into one of the most lethal theaters of the Pacific War, where Japanese snipers have turned the jungle into a killing gallery. His platoon sergeant told him he was suicidal. His squad mates whispered he'd be dead within a week. But on this morning, moving through the dense undergrowth toward a ridge where 3 Marines were killed the day before by invisible shooters, Leckie adjusts the scope on a Springfield 1903 A4 and prepares to prove them all wrong. If you believe stories like this shouldn't vanish with time, subscribe. Let's keep their memory alive together. Robert Leckie grew up in rural Pennsylvania, hunting white-tailed deer in the Allegheny foothills with his father's bolt-action rifle. He learned patience in those mountains, learned to read wine to the sway of branches, learned that a clean kill required more than marksmanship. It required understanding of environment, of movement, of breath control in cold air that burned the lungs. His father had been a hunter his entire life, a man who spoke more through actions than words, who taught his son that the forest revealed its secrets only to those willing to wait. They would sit in deer stands for hours before dawn, frost forming on their rifle barrels, watching the tree lean for the flicker of movement that meant game was approaching. Leckie learned to distinguish between the sound of wind through pine needles and the sound of an animal moving through underbrush. He learned to calculate distance by eye, to compensate for elevation and wind drift, to control his breathing so his chest wouldn't move and disturb his aim. These were skills born of necessity in the Depression-era hills, where a successful hunt meant meat for the winter, where every bullet had to count because ammunition cost money his family didn't have. When he enlisted in the Marine Corps in 1942, he carried those skills with him, but the Corps had different ideas about how war should be fought. Standard issue was the M1 Garand, semi-automatic, 8-round clip, reliable and fast. Leckie requested a scope rifle. His request was denied. Marines weren't trained as snipers in the formal sense. Not yet. The doctrine emphasized fire volume, not precision. The theory was that overwhelming firepower would suppress enemy positions, that individual marksmanship mattered less than collective rate of fire. But Leckie had seen what Japanese snipers did. He'd watched men drop mid-sentence. Single bullet through the skull, the shooter invisible in the canopy. He'd seen entire patrols pinned down for hours by one hidden rifleman, morale bleeding out with every minute of helplessness. He'd seen good men, friends, killed by an enemy they never saw, their bodies left in the open because recovering them meant walking into the sniper's kill zone. The Marine Corps had no answer to this. No counter-sniper program, no scope rifles issued below battalion level, no training for the kind of patient, methodical hunting that Leckie knew from the Pennsylvania hills. So he took matters into his own hands. Using money saved from his enlistment bonus, he ordered a commercial hunting scope from a sporting goods catalog, paid extra for expedited shipping to a rear echelon supply depot, and when it arrived 3 months later, he mounted himself on his issued Springfield rifle using a makeshift rail. He filed down from scrap aluminum. The modification was unauthorized. The weapon technically violated uniformity regulations. His company commander could have ordered him to remove it, but the officer was pragmatic, and losses from snipers were mounting, so he looked the other way. Leckie's squad mates were less accommodating. They mocked the setup, called it a toy, said he'd be better off with a standard Garand like everyone else. One lance corporal told him point blank he was painting a target on his own back, that Japanese snipers would see the scope glint and shoot him first. Another suggested he was just trying to play cowboy, that war wasn't a hunting trip, and his backwoods skills meant nothing against trained enemy soldiers. The criticism stung, but Leckie said nothing. He cleaned his rifle every night, checked the scope alignment, practiced estimating ranges using makeshift targets carved into tree bark. He kept to himself, reading at night by candlelight when others played cards, maintaining a distance that some mistook for arrogance, but was actually just focus. He knew what he needed to do. He just needed the chance to do it. The waiting was its own kind of torture. Weeks passed on Bougainville with Leckie assigned to standard patrol duties, his modified rifle carried but never used for its intended purpose. He watched other Marines die to sniper fire, watched the frustration build in his company as they lost men to an enemy they couldn't fight back against. The chance came on March 18, 1944. A Marine patrol moving through a ridgeline sector designated green. 7 came under fire from an elevated position. 3 men were killed in the first 30 seconds, shot to the head or throat before they could take cover. The surviving Marines retreated under covering fire, dragging their wounded, unable to locate the shooter. A second patrol sent in 2 hours later met the same result. 1 dead, 2 wounded, no enemy contact beyond the bullets themselves. The Japanese sniper or snipers had perfect concealment and perfect angles. Standard suppression fire was useless. Artillery couldn't be called in without risking the nearby friendly positions. The company commander needed someone to go in and eliminate the threat directly. Leckie volunteered. His platoon sergeant tried to talk him out of it. Said it was a suicide mission, that even with a scope he'd be outmatched by an experienced Japanese sniper with weeks of preparation and entrenched positions. The sergeant pointed out that Japanese snipers were trained specialists, graduates of dedicated schools where they spent months learning fieldcraft and marksmanship, equipped with quality optics and purpose-built rifles. Leckie's response was simple. Someone had to go, and he was the only one with the equipment and training to do it. The sergeant reluctantly agreed, assigning him a single spotter, a corporal named Jimmy Voss who had grown up hunting in Montana and understood the mentality. Even if he didn't trust the mail-order scope. They moved out at dawn, the jungle still shrouded in mist, visibility less than 30 yards. The air was thick with moisture, every breath heavy, uniforms already soaked with sweat despite the early hour. Leckie led, moving in deliberate slow-motion steps, placing each boot carefully to avoid snapping twigs, eyes scanning the canopy above and the undergrowth ahead. Voss followed 10 yards back, covering the flanks, watching for movement. They reached the ridgeline perimeter by 0700 hours, entering the kill zone where the previous patrols had been hit. Leckie dropped to a crouch, then to his belly, crawling forward through mud and leaf litter, the Springfield cradled at his elbows. He could see the bodies of the fallen Marines, still lying where they dropped, no one willing to risk recovery under the sniper's overwatch. The sight hit him hard. Young men, some barely out of high school, sprawled in the unnatural poses death creates, their weapons falling beside them. Leckie studied the angles, the bullet trajectories based on wound placement, working backward to estimate firing positions. Japanese snipers often tied themselves into trees, using harnesses to stabilize their aim, sometimes staying in position for days. They would bring minimal supplies and remain absolutely motionless, camouflaged so effectively they became part of the tree itself. He scanned the canopy, looking not for a man but for anomalies, unnatural shapes, shadow inconsistencies, anything that broke the organic chaos of the jungle. Leckie let his focus soften, stopped looking for specific things, and started looking for wrongness. Voss whispered a warning. Movement left flank, 40 yards. Leckie shifted his aim, peering through the scope, adjusting for the dim light. Nothing. Then a flicker, not movement, but wrongness. A section of branch that didn't sway with the others when a breeze pushed through the canopy. Leckie focused, letting his breathing slow, his heartbeat steady. The crosshairs settled. He saw it. A shaped human, wrapped in camouflage netting, nestled in the fork of a banyan tree 20 feet off the ground. The Japanese sniper was looking the other direction, scanning the approach route the previous patrols had used. Leckie exhaled half a breath and squeezed the trigger. The Springfield cracked, the recoil punching his shoulder, the scope momentarily losing the target. When he reacquired the position, the shape was falling, tumbling through branches, hitting the ground with a wet thud. Voss confirmed the kill. 1 down. But Leckie's shot had given away his position. Within seconds, 2 more rifle cracks echoed from different positions, bullets snapping through the air inches above his head, splintering bark from the tree he'd used for cover. Multiple snipers. A coordinated team. Leckie rolled left, putting a tree trunk between himself and the incoming fire, his mind racing through geometry. 2 shooters, one northeast, one due east, both elevated. He couldn't engage both simultaneously. Voss crawled up beside him, breathing hard, eyes wide. They were in a triangulated kill zone, enemy shooters with established positions and clear fields of fire. Leckie made the decision instantly. They would take the fight to the enemy now, while he knew where they were. He pointed toward the northeast contact, gestured for Voss to provide suppressive fire on his signal. Voss nodded, gripping his Garand. Leckie counted silently, visualizing the movements he'd need to make, the angles he'd need to achieve. Then he barked the signal. Voss rose to a crouch, firing rapid shots toward the northeast position, not aiming to kill but to force the sniper's head down. Leckie shifted right, scope up, searching the eastern canopy. There, another shape, this one in a palm tree, partially obscured by fronds. The sniper was tracking Voss, lining up a shot. Leckie fired first. The bullet struck center mass, the sniper jerking backward, his rifle falling, his body slumping against the harness that held him. 2 down. The suppressive fire stopped. Silence crashed back into the jungle, broken only by the distant calls of birds. Leckie waited motionless, scope sweeping for a third contact. Minutes passed, each one stretching. Nothing. Voss moved forward cautiously, confirming the second kill. The threat was eliminated. They recovered the bodies of the fallen Marines, dragging them back toward friendly lines. It was brutal work. The bodies were heavy, dead weight in the truest sense, and the jungle terrain made every yard a battle. By the time they reached the company perimeter, both men were exhausted, covered in mud and blood. The company commander greeted them with quiet nods, no speeches, just the grim satisfaction of a job done. Later that night, the commander pulled Leckie aside and told him quietly that what he'd done mattered, that 3 enemy snipers meant dozens of Marine lives saved. Leckie just nodded. He didn't feel heroic. He felt tired and sad and angry that it had come to this. But he also felt something else. Purpose. For the first time since landing on Bougainville, his skills were being used correctly. That night, the other Marines watched him differently, the mockery replaced by something else. Respect, maybe, or just the recognition that the mail-order gun worked. The word spread fast. Within a week, Leckie was being tasked for every counter-sniper mission in the sector. The Japanese had fortified Bougainville with veteran snipers, men trained in specialized schools, equipped with precision rifles and high-quality optics. The Marines were losing men daily, unable to advance through certain jungle corridors without taking casualties. Leckie became the answer. He operated alone now, preferring solitude to the noise and unpredictability of a squad. He moved through the jungle like something between predator and ghost, spending hours in a single position, waiting for the smallest mistake from his targets. Japanese snipers were disciplined, patient, trained to remain motionless for entire days. But everyone makes mistakes. A cough, a shifted foot, a moment of inattention. Leckie learned to wait longer than they could. He learned to anticipate their routines, the times they repositioned, the angles they preferred. He learned that Japanese snipers often worked in pairs, one as primary shooter and one as spotter, and that killing the primary first would cause the spotter to break protocol, expose himself in confusion or rage. On March 23rd, moving through a ravine designated Red 4, Leckie identified a sniper team operating from a concealed pit on the opposite ridge. The primary was dug in, invisible except for the tiny shadow of his rifle barrel. Leckie waited 4 hours, unmoving, the sun climbing overhead, the temperature rising into the 90s, humidity making every breath feel like drowning. Insects crawled over him, his muscles cramped. He ignored it all, focused entirely on that tiny shadow. It came when a Marine patrol passed below. The primary took a shot, and a Marine fell. Leckie focused on the muzzle flash, calculating the exact position. 230 yards. Uphill angle. Slight crosswind. He made the adjustments instinctively. He fired. The bullet struck the primary through the upper chest. The spotter immediately rose, trying to drag his partner back. Leckie's second shot took him through the head. Both down in under 3 seconds. By the end of March, Leckie's tally stood at 11 confirmed kills. By mid-April, it was 18. The men stopped calling him Mailbox. They treated him with quiet deference reserved for people who do necessary, terrible work. Leckie didn't speak much, just maintained his rifle and moved when called. His hands developed calluses from the hours spent crawling through the jungle. His uniform hung loose, weight dropping from stress and constant exertion. He slept poorly, his mind replaying shots, questioning whether he'd made the right calls, seeing the faces of enemy snipers in the moments before death. Some had looked young. Some had looked terrified. Some had looked resigned. Leckie tried not to think about them as people. They were threats. Eliminating threats was his job. But late at night, when the jungle was dark and distant artillery rolled across the island, he couldn't help but wonder about the men he'd killed. His company commander tried to get him officially recognized as a sniper, to get him formal training and better equipment. But the request was denied. The Marine Corps still didn't have a sniper program. Leckie was an anomaly, an improvisation, effective but unrecognized. He didn't care. Recognition wasn't why he did it. He did it because Marines were dying, and he could stop it. On April 12th, Leckie was assigned to clear a section of jungle known as the Green Hell, a 2-mile stretch where 4 patrols had been ambushed in 3 days. Intelligence estimated at least 6 Japanese snipers operating in overlapping fields of fire, creating a killing corridor that no Marine unit could penetrate without casualties. Leckie studied maps, identified likely positions based on terrain and previous attack patterns, and moving alone at dawn. He worked methodically, clearing one sector at a time, using patience and calculated aggression. He would wait until a sniper revealed himself by firing, then immediately relocate, circling to flank the position. It was exhausting, every moment requiring absolute focus. The first sniper revealed himself at 0800 hours. Leckie tracked the sound, spotted the muzzle flash, and returned fire within seconds. The sniper fell from his tree position. One down. Leckie moved immediately, knowing the shot would alert the others. He circled south, using a dry stream bed for cover, approaching the next position from an unexpected angle. The second sniper was more cautious, didn't fire, but Leckie spotted him anyway. A slight discoloration in tree bark where the sniper had modified the trunk to create a shooting port. Leckie fired through the port. 2 down. By 1100 hours, the count was 4. By 1400 hours, it was 6. Each engagement was different, each requiring its own solution. One sniper had dug a spider hole at ground level, concealed under vegetation. Leckie found him by watching for leaf movement when there was no wind. Another had positioned himself in a bombed-out tree trunk. Leckie spotted the glint of his rifle scope and took the shot through a gap in the debris. The sixth and final sniper was the most difficult. He was experienced, disciplined, never fired, never moved. Leckie spent 3 hours searching before finally spotting the faint outline against a massive tree trunk. The shot was over 300 yards, through dense foliage, at an upward angle. Leckie took his time, compensating for every variable. He fired. The bullet traveled true, and the sniper fell. The Green Hell went quiet. Patrols moved through, without a single shot fired. Leckie walked back that evening, rifle slung, face blank, covered in mud and insect bites. His platoon sergeant met him at the perimeter, just stared for a moment, then nodded once. No words needed. The next morning, an armorer examined Leckie's Springfield, wanted to understand how a mail-order scope could perform so well. He found the setup crude but functional, the scope mount slightly misaligned but compensated for through practice and muscle memory. He recommended Leckie receive a proper sniper rifle if one could be sourced. None were available. Leckie kept his Springfield. He would carry it for the remainder of the Bougainville campaign, through more missions, eventually reaching 24 confirmed Japanese snipers killed. 24 men who would have killed countless Marines if left in position. 24 threats eliminated by a weapon the Marine Corps never issued, wielded by a man who refused to accept that doctrine mattered more than results. The Japanese command on Bougainville began to notice the pattern. Their sniper teams, which had been devastatingly effective for months, were suddenly being eliminated at an unsustainable rate. Intercepted communications showed confusion, frustration, a search for explanations. Some Japanese officers theorized the Americans had deployed a specialized counter-sniper unit. Others believed it was multiple shooters working in coordinated sweeps. None suspected it was one Marine with a hunting scope. The psychological impact was significant. Japanese snipers became more cautious, less willing to take shots, second-guessing their concealment. The aggressive overwatch that had defined their tactics began to erode. Marine patrols noticed the difference. They moved faster, took fewer casualties, advanced through areas that had been impassable weeks before. Leckie's silent war was reshaping the battlefield in ways no official strategy had managed. But the toll on Leckie himself was mounting. Constant stress, minimal sleep, the weight of being the only effective counter to a threat that had killed dozens of his comrades. He lost weight. His hands developed a faint tremor when not gripping his rifle. His eyes took on a distant quality. The psychological cost of killing, even justified killing, accumulates. On May 2nd, Leckie was ordered to stand down for 72 hours, mandatory rest imposed by a medic who threatened to report him for combat fatigue. The medic had seen too many good men push past their breaking point. Leckie complied reluctantly, spending the time cleaning his rifle obsessively, reading letters from home he'd ignored for weeks. His mother had written about the changing seasons in Pennsylvania. His father had included a brief note, just 3 sentences, saying he was proud, that he understood what Leckie was doing, that the skills he taught his son were being put to good use. Leckie read that note a dozen times, folded it carefully, and kept it in his pocket. When the 72 hours ended, he returned to rotation with the same methodical focus. His 24th and final confirmed kill came on May 9th, a Japanese sniper position in a spider hole overlooking a river crossing. The sniper had killed 2 Marines the previous day, both shot while attempting to ford the shallow water. The river was strategically important, the only practical crossing point for miles. Leckie spent 6 hours lying in mud at the river's edge, partially submerged, leeches attaching to his legs and arms, waiting for the sniper to take another shot. A patrol was scheduled to cross at 1,400 hours, and Leckie knew the sniper would fire. At 1,403 hours, the first Marine stepped into the water. The sniper fired. Leckie saw the flash, a tiny burst of light from a camouflage position 30 yards upstream. He returned fire instantly, adjusting for angle and distance in a fraction of a second. The bullet struck the sniper through the gap in his camouflage netting, killing him before he could retreat. The Marine in the water flinched at the sound but wasn't hit. The patrol crossed safely. That evening, Leckie cleaned his rifle one last time, breaking it down completely, inspecting every component. He didn't know then that it was his final mission as a counter-sniper, but something in him recognized a moment as significant. On May 15, 1944, Marine forces on Bougainville transitioned to a defensive posture, the island largely secured. Leckie's services as a counter-sniper were no longer needed. He returned to standard infantry duties. His Springfield stored, his scope removed and packed away. The war continued. Leckie would go on to fight at Peleliu, one of the bloodiest battles in the Pacific Theater, surviving horrors that made Bougainville look tame. He carried the Springfield through Peleliu, but never had occasion to use it as a sniper rifle. The fighting there was close and brutal, house to house, cave to cave, no room for the patient stalking that had defined his work on Bougainville. When the war finally ended, Leckie returned home to Pennsylvania and tried to rebuild a life from the fragments of who he'd been. He took a job in a lumber mill, married a woman from his hometown, bought a small house on the edge of the same mountains where he'd learned to hunt. He never spoke publicly about his time as a counter-sniper. No official records documented his 24 kills. The Marine Corps, still without a formal sniper program, had no mechanism to recognize what he'd done. His squad mates remembered, though. They carried the memory of the man who went into the jungle alone, carrying a mail-order rifle they'd mocked, and came back again and again, having eliminated threats no one else could touch. Some visited him over the years, unannounced appearances at his door, men who just wanted to shake his hand and say thank you. Leckie would invite them in, share a meal, talk about things that had nothing to do with the war. They understood. Some things didn't need to be spoken. Decades later, when the Marine Corps finally established its sniper school, when precision marksmanship became doctrine rather than improvisation, historians began to piece together stories like Leckie's. They found after-action reports mentioning an unnamed Marine with a scope rifle. They found casualty statistics showing a dramatic drop in sniper-related deaths during April and May 1944 on Bougainville. They found a notation in a supply log about a commercial rifle scope shipped to a forward unit, but they never found Leckie's name in the official records. He'd been too far outside the system, too much an anomaly. By the time researchers tried to track him down in the 1980s, Leckie had passed away, taking the full details with him. His widow confirmed some basic facts, but said her husband never liked to talk about the war. She mentioned he'd kept his rifle, stored in a case in the attic, but after his death she donated it to a local veterans organization. The rifle eventually ended up in a small military museum in Pennsylvania, displayed without any particular fanfare. Identified only as a Springfield 1903 with commercial scope used in the Pacific Theater. The museum curator didn't know its specific history. No placard explained what it had done. It sat alongside dozens of other weapons, anonymous and unremarkable to visitors who passed by without a second glance. The Pacific Theater produced countless acts of uncelebrated heroism, individual Marines and soldiers adapting to impossible conditions with improvisation and sheer will. Robert Leckie's counter-sniper campaign on Bougainville represents a particular kind of heroism, the quiet, methodical, unglamorous work of eliminating threats one by one, saving lives through patience rather than spectacle. His story matters not because it's unique in the Pacific War, but because it's representative of so many others like it, untold and unrecorded, where ordinary men with extraordinary skill stepped outside doctrine to do what needed doing. The mail-order scope became a symbol of that improvisation, a rejection of the idea that only official channels could solve problems. Leckie saw a gap in capability, filled it with his own resources and determination, and proved that sometimes the best solutions come from the bottom up, from individuals willing to take risks the system won't authorize. His 24 confirmed kills weren't just numbers. Each one represented Marines who lived because a threat was removed, patrols that moved safely through terrain that had been killing grounds. The impact rippled outward beyond the immediate tactical victories, affecting morale, operational tempo, and the psychological balance between forces in that sector. Conservative estimates suggested that each sniper Leckie killed would have accounted for at least 5 Marine casualties. That's 120 lives saved minimum, not counting wounded, units pinned down, operations delayed or canceled. And yet history nearly forgot him, because he didn't fit the narrative structures the military preferred, because his methods were unauthorized, because he didn't survive long enough to tell his own story in the format historians could easily capture. His legacy exists in fragments, in the memories of men who are themselves now gone, in the statistical anomalies of casualty reports that show something changed in April 1944, even if official records couldn't explain what. That's the nature of much of war's truth. It lives in the spaces between official accounts, in the stories told quietly among veterans, in the equipment modified in violation of regulations, in the individual decisions made under stress that doctrine never anticipated. Leckie's mail-order gun is a reminder that wars aren't won solely by strategy and logistics, but by the accumulated actions of individuals willing to step forward when the system fails. The lesson extends beyond military history. In any complex system, there are problems that institutional structures can't solve, either because they move too slowly or because they're philosophically opposed to certain solutions. Progress often requires individuals willing to work outside the system, to take risks with their own resources and reputations, to prove through results what couldn't be approved through channels. Leckie didn't ask permission. He didn't wait for the Marine Corps to develop a sniper program. He identified a problem, developed a solution, and implemented it, accepting the personal risk and criticism that came with it. Today, the Marine Corps Scout Sniper program is among the most elite and respected in the world. Its methods refined over decades, its operators trained to a level Leckie could only have imagined. But the core of what they do, patient observation, precise shooting, solitary missions into hostile territory, would be familiar to him. He helped pioneer those methods, not through formal channels, but through necessity, proving their value in the only way that mattered, by saving lives, eliminating threats when no one else could. Modern Marine snipers train for months, learning fieldcraft, stalking, camouflage, ballistics, range estimation, all the skills Leckie taught himself or brought from civilian life. They use rifles that cost thousands of dollars, scopes with sophisticated ranging and environmental compensation. But the fundamental challenge remains the same. Find the enemy before he finds you. Make the shot when it matters. Stay alive to do it again. Leckie understood those fundamentals, and he executed them with equipment that was primitive by modern standards but adequate for the task. His story isn't about glory or recognition. It's about competence, determination, and the willingness to be mocked until results silence the mockery. It's about understanding that sometimes the right tool is the one you make yourself, and the right method is the one that works, regardless of what doctrine says. 24 Japanese snipers learned that lesson too late. The Marines who walked safely through the green hell learned it just in time. If this story moved your heart even once, subscribe. It's the least tribute we can give to men like him. Where are you watching this story from? Comment below. And we, decades later, learn it again through a fragment of story almost lost to time. The story of a man they called Suicidal, until his mail-order gun proved them all wrong. His rifle sits in a museum case in Pennsylvania, its scope slightly scratched, its stock bearing the scars of jungle warfare, its barrel worn from the round it fired. Visitors walk past without knowing what it did, without understanding that this anonymous weapon changed the course of campaign, saved hundreds of lives, pioneered techniques that would become standard doctrine. That's fitting in a way. Leckie never sought recognition. He just did the work, quietly and effectively, and then went home when the war ended. The rifle, like the man, asked for nothing, but both deserve to be remembered.